Chapter 19. In the Land of the Assassins. Franz Ferdinand, as remarked earlier, was a reactionary. He would have liked to turn back the calendar by a century. The Slavs who plotted against him were more reactionary still. They looked back more than 5 centuries, as remarked earlier, to the First Battle of Kosovo, at which they believed the greatness of Serbia had been lost. On June 28, 1914, the conspirators proposed to redeem the defeat of 1,389 at the cost of their own lives. Of course, it was not really the 1,389 battle that had doomed the Christian Balkans, it was the Second Battle of Kosovo, in 1448, that had done so. But the apprentice terrorists who dreamed these terrible dreams may not have known that. There were no scholars among them. Denizens of the revolutionary underground tend to be thought of as belonging to the political left. But terrorists often occupy a time warp of their own. Sometimes they look not forward but backward. They seek to restore kingdoms long since crumbled into dust. They rally to the banners of forgotten causes. They hearken to prophets who preached to the people of a bygone age. Hence religious fanatics in the caves of Tora Bora in the opening years of the 21st century seeking to revive a religion as it was taught in the 7th century. Hence schoolboys in the primitive villages of the Balkans a century ago, hoping to become assassins like the legendary figures of whom they had heard tell in patriotic poetry. These groups in the terrorist underworld were much the same in format, if not in message. They swore terrible oaths of fidelity, were subject to frightening tests, underwent initiation ceremonies at which blood was drunk from skulls, had a pistol put to their head and obeyed an order to pull the trigger, used code names, and were organized into cells in which only the leader knew members of the other cells. Though their aims differed, they sometimes assisted one another and often borrowed ceremonies, practices, and procedures from one another. What distinguished terrorists from ordinary assassins was that they did not necessarily desire the immediate consequences of their violence. They killed people that often even they regarded as innocent. Their unique strategy, the strategy of terrorism, was to frighten society into doing something that the terrorists wanted society to do. An ordinary assassin shoots John Doe because he wants John Doe dead. A terrorist assassin shoots John Doe, whose life or death may be a matter of indifference to him, because he wants the authorities to react in a certain way to the killing. At a time when the rulers of Eurasia repressed free political expression, many young idealists were driven underground. Beneath the empires of old Europe and eating away at their foundations throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries were networks of secret societies. Their members were visionaries, nationalists, army officers, romantics, patriots, idealists, fanatics, or madmen. The societies were illegal and the life they offered was dangerous, but for young people that often was an attraction rather than a drawback. Life underground sounded glamorous and looked romantic. Some of the youthful terrorists believed in bombing and assassination, while others believed that individual violence was less effective than mass organization, but a belief they held in common was that society as it existed had to be blown up and blown away before construction of a better world could begin. Undoing the consequences of the Industrial Revolution was a goal that many of them sought, though they would have put it differently, and to that end they fomented strikes and undertook sabotage. Others were intoxicated by the heady brew of nationalism, overthrowing alien rule. As Z.A.B. Zeman has pointed out, population pressures lent an intensity and an urgency to nationalists' demands. The Habsburg and other multinational empires were a breeding ground for young political criminals and deranged radicals of right and left. Kings, presidents, prime ministers, and other leaders of government and society were murdered promiscuously, without exciting as much surprise as such events would cause today. That was particularly true in the backward, semi-tribal southeast of Europe, where peasants lived with their animals, blood feuds were common, and vengeance killings were the norm. Through the imaginative fiction of a Joseph Conrad or a Dostoevsky, one can try to picture this secret society world of long ago in the far distant Balkans. It was the world from which Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb, emerged, an untalented, but serious-minded teenager whose career choice was to be a martyr. He was an adherent of the Young Bosnia movement, a loose grouping of youthful nationalists. Villagers, products of a feudal society, the young Bosnians, who belonged to the first literate generation in their province, read and discussed relatively up-to-date and sometimes subversive literature. Walt Whitman, Alexander Herzen, Oscar Wilde, Maxim Gorky, and Henrik Ibsen were among the authors whose works they read. It is difficult to imagine what these schoolchildren, with their emotional roots in Serbian 14th century martyrdom, and their economic roots in the Middle Ages, made of Victorian and Edwardian modernism. They were acquainted with the writings, theories, and actions of the Russian revolutionary underground, and of the nihilists of a half-century before, but found it difficult to relate the various socialisms that animated the Russians to the peasant world of the Balkans. However, Princip himself owned a small library of anarchist literature that included the works of Mikhail Bakunin and Peter Kropotkin. The verses of Nietzsche often were on his lips. A solitary figure, he lived among books rather than people. Princip was born July 13, 1894, in the hamlet of Gornji Obliage in the high woodlands of the Grajevo Valley. It was in what Zeman has called the poorest part of a poor province. It was the Krajina, in western Bosnia, near Dalmatia. The Princip family had lived there for centuries, during which time frontiers and states had come and gone. They were Serbs of Bosnia, closely attached to their land, their church, their communal organizations, and their clan. Gavrilo left the valley when he was 13 years old to attend school in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. A slight, dark, curly-haired boy, on the frail side, an ascetic who neither smoked nor drank, he grew a moustache that made him look older but also made him look a bit like an organ grinder. He rejected religion, fought with his teachers, and attended schools only fitfully. He wanted to be a poet, feeling the sorrows of others. It bothered him that he was physically unprepossessing. When he volunteered for Serbian military service in the Balkan Wars of 1912-13, he was turned down by a recruiting officer who said, "You are too small and weak." The remark stung him. He never forgave that officer. During the 20 years of Princip's life, assassination had been a frequent and characteristic manifestation of the split between society and its underworld. Among those killed had been the President of France, 1894. The Shah of Persia, 1896, the President of Uruguay, 1896. The Prime Minister of Spain, 1897, the President of Guatemala, 1898. The Empress of Austria, 1898, the President of the Dominican Republic, 1899. The King of Italy, 1900, the President of the United States, 1901. The King and Queen of Serbia, 1903. The Prime Minister of Greece, 1905. The Prime Minister of Bulgaria, 1907. The Prime Minister of Persia, 1907. The King of Portugal, 1908. The Prime Minister of Egypt, 1910. The Prime Minister of Russia, 1911. The Prime Minister of Spain, 1912. The President of Mexico, 1913. And the King of the Hellenes, 1913. On average, one head of state or head of government was murdered every year. When the 19-year-old Princip read or heard in March 1914 or thereabouts that the heir to the Habsburg Empire was to visit Bosnia in June, he hit upon the project, he claimed, of organizing an assassination. To the end of his life he insisted that it was his own idea. Be that as it may, other restless nationalists had plotted to kill Franz Ferdinand without success on many occasions, most recently in January 1914. There are those who believe that it was not so much that the Archduke was hated by the young Bosnians, indeed they were badly informed and, in a number of respects, quite mistaken about his views, but that he was an outstanding symbol of the existing order that the students wanted to frighten and to overthrow. According to another set of informants, it was the belief of the conspirators that Franz Ferdinand advocated trialism. He intended to make the Slavs full partners in government along with Austro-Germans and Hungarians. This policy might diffuse Serb nationalism and deprive young Bosnia, and the others of their issue. A contrary theory is that the Serbian nationalists had received false information that Austria-Hungary was on the point of attacking Serbia. The maneuvers in Sarajevo, they told one another, were a mere dress rehearsal. After the Balkan Wars, everybody knew that Serbia was exhausted, and would require several years to recuperate. Franz Ferdinand, they whispered, planned to take advantage of this helplessness by launching an invasion. They wrongly claimed that in Vienna, in the inner circle of government, the Archduke was the leader of the war party. In fact, he was the leading advocate of peace. Princip asked friends to join in the plot. The friends agreed. He requested lessons in the use of firearms again, friends agreed. One friend, a certain Milan Ciganovic, knew a gentleman no name supplied, who could and did supply weaponry, bombs, revolvers, and poison with which to commit suicide after killing their targets. The same gentleman ranked high in a secret organization that promised to smuggle them across the frontier from Serbia into Austrian-occupied Bosnia in time for Franz Ferdinand's visit. The revolvers were 4 Belgian automatic weapons, the latest issue. The 6 bombs were of a special Serbian manufacture, tiny, lightweight, and easy both to conceal and to use. The poison was cyanide. Why did the gentleman Major Voja Tankovic, right-hand man of the head of the Black Hand, a secret society within the Serbian army of which more will be said presently, choose to facilitate the assassination? Is it possible that his organization, through him, recruited Princip and his friends rather than vice versa? Or, if the plot really did originate with Princip, did Tankovic back it because he seriously meant what he said years later, that he did it to make trouble for Pashic, the Prime Minister of Serbia? Another of the many versions of the story of the Sarajevo murders supposedly was told by the Black Hand leader Apis to a friend in 1915. The friend published it in 1924. In this account, Tankovic complained to Apis one day, "Dragutin, there are several Bosnian youths who are pestering me. These kids want at any cost to perform some great deed. They have heard that Franz Ferdinand will come to Bosnia for maneuvers and have begged me to let them go there. What do you say?" I have told them they cannot go, but they give me no peace. To this, Apis responded something like, "Why not give them a chance?" But then, some time later, reflecting upon it, Apis began to think that it was important to kill Franz Ferdinand, and that the schoolboys lacked the requisite skills. So he sent a message to Princip to abort the mission, intending to send someone more seasoned instead. But Princip insisted on going ahead. There have been 3 trials in which magistrates have sat in judgment on the Sarajevo affair: Austrian, 1914, Serbian, 1917, and Yugoslav, 1953. All 3 were politically motivated, and of their findings, none compels credence. Even the exhaustive research and interviews undertaken by and for the great Italian historian Luigi Albertini in the interwar years resolved nothing. Witnesses saw a chance to settle a score or to advance a cause. Some forgot or confused things. Serbian nationalists have remained proud of the murders, many have wanted to take credit for them, or others perhaps wanted to make themselves seem important by knowing how they really happened. Apis, in asserting that he was personally responsible for the killing, may have believed that he was absolving his country from blame. Or he may have believed that, for one reason or another, he would not be condemned by the Serbian tribunal that tried him in 1917 if the judges realized that he was the patriot who killed Franz Ferdinand. Or the tribunal may have ordered Apis's execution in order to keep him from telling, we do not know what. In the end, all that we know with certainty is that Princip fired the gun. The sinister group that aided Princip was called Ujad Ingenie ili Smart, Union or Death. Later it became known as the Black Hand. It was founded March 3, 1911, by 7 nationalists who continued to protest the results of the Bosnian crisis of 1908-09. When the Serbian government accepted, albeit reluctantly, the Austro-Hungarian annexation of Bosnia-Herzegovina, so did the existing government-sponsored nationalist organization, the Narodna Odbrana, National Defense. From being a military-oriented anti-Austrian grouping, it converted itself into a largely cultural society. Dissenters from the decision to accept the annexation later formed the ultra-secret Black Hand in order to carry on the struggle. One of its founding members was a student of the history of European secret societies in France, Italy, Germany, and elsewhere. A self-conscious traditionalism, some might call it imitation, is evident in the Constitution, in 37 articles, and bylaws, in 28 articles, of the elite secret society that formally came into existence in May 1911. It modeled itself largely on the Freemason lodges and on Mazzini's Young Italy movement in the 19th century. The Black Hand infiltrated Narodna Odbrana, and perhaps other organizations, but it was not widely known itself outside of government circles. Its existence, however, was known to a number of foreign countries. It constituted a leading faction within the military, and was represented within the government. The organization consisted of extremist army officers and extreme nationalist politicians. Its dominating figure, though perhaps never its formal leader, was an army officer, now the powerful chief of military intelligence, named Dragutin Dmitrievich, a bull-like man codenamed Apis. In 1903, Apis had led a murder party that slaughtered the king and queen of Serbia in their palace, then threw their mutilated corpses out of the window. During the reign of the murdered king, Serbia had been a satellite of Austria. Under the dynasty that Apis and his colleagues restored to the throne, successive administrations pursued anti-Austrian policies, but not sufficiently so for Apis. Consenting to the Bosnian annexation in 1908-09 was, in his view, treason. The Black Hand pursued ultimate goals that were different from Princip's. Apis and his colleagues wanted Serbia to rule all the lands in which Serbs lived. Princip dreamed of creating a federation in which Croatia, Slovenia, and other southern Slavic peoples were united. These differences were not necessarily relevant in the spring of 1914, they were long-range goals. Whether he knew it or not, however, in the short term, Princip was walking into a political crossfire. The Serbian government and even the Serbian army were split in two. Apis was in the grip of a fierce conflict with the 68-year-old Prime Minister, Nikola Pasic, a veteran politician who, like Apis, was a Serb nationalist but, unlike Apis, was cautious. Each led a faction in a fight that was climaxing as Princip initiated his project. In May 1914, Apis persuaded the reigning monarch, King Peter, that Pasic ought to be dismissed. Then Russia intervened. As Serbia's sponsor among the great powers, Russia could, to some extent, lay down the law. Nikolai Hartwig, the Russian minister in Belgrade, intervened to retain Pasic as prime minister. Hartwig recognized that Serbia needed years of rest in which to recover from the Balkan wars and to consolidate its gains. It was no time for reckless adventurism. On May 26, Gavrilo Princip set out from Belgrade, and headed toward a prearranged rendezvous with his fellow conspirators in Sarajevo. He traveled for nearly 10 days through wild, forbidding country, difficult to traverse. His greatest challenge would be to cross the unfriendly frontier between independent Serbia and Habsburg-ruled Bosnia. But it all was made easy for him. Agents were waiting to help him at every point along the way. It was a tunnel route developed and controlled by Narodna Odbrana, and borrowed for the occasion by the Black Hand. On June 4, Princip arrived in Sarajevo to meet fellow conspirators, to prepare, and to rehearse. The historian Albertini believed that Ciganovic, who had put Princip in touch with Tankovic of the Black Hand, was a police informer. If so, the Prime Minister from afar followed Princip's progress step by step. According to one version, the Prime Minister gave orders to border guards to stop Princip at the Serbian frontier, orders that were disobeyed by Serbian officials loyal to Apis. Instead, they let the conspirators pass, and then told Pasic that they had not received his orders until it was too late. In a variation of that version, those same officials then confessed to Pasic what they had done. One way or another, the Prime Minister, it is widely believed, learned that terrorists, Princip and a companion, carrying pistols and bombs had crossed the Drina River into Bosnia, and he either knew or guessed that the Archduke must be the target. But Pasic always denied that he had specific knowledge of what was about to occur. For Pasic, a wily survivor of some of the world's most treacherous politics, the choices, to the extent that he did know of the plot, were not easy. His country was exhausted after the Balkan Wars, and in no position to defy a great power. An attack on Franz Ferdinand was bound to trigger some kind of nasty international situation with which Serbia would find it difficult to deal. Of course he could do nothing, in the hope that the inexperienced schoolboys would flunk their test, but whatever they did might at least supply hardliners in Vienna with a pretext for taking action. If, on the other hand, Pasic warned the Austrians, news of what he had done leaked out, the Black Hand might order him assassinated too, or else might use news of what the Prime Minister had done to label him a traitor. Whatever warning he sent also might be used by Vienna to prove that his government was involved in the plot against the Archduke. Was he not admitting it by his very warning that Serbian officials were planning an attack? In the end, despite his later denials, Pasic may have sent a cable to his legation in Vienna sometime in the first half of June instructing his minister there to inform the Austrian government that owing to a leakage of information, Serbia had grounds to suspect that a plot was being hatched against the life of the Archduke on the occasion of his journey to Bosnia. Since this visit might give rise to regrettable incidents on the part of some fanatic, it would be useful to suggest to the Austro-Hungarian government the advisability of postponing the Archduke's visit. Whether or not Pasic sent such a cable, his envoy did seek such an interview. Minister Ljuba Jovanovic, who may have received the cable, had at least two reasons for not following his prime minister's instructions. He was on bad terms with the Habsburg foreign minister, Count Leopold von Berchtold, the official whom he was supposed to alert, and preferred not to have to meet with him. He chose instead to seek an interview with Finance Minister Leon von Bilinski, under whose administration, at least temporarily, fell the newly annexed provinces of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which the Archduke was scheduled to visit. Security issues, however, were the responsibility of General Oskar Potiorek, governor of the provinces, nominally subordinate to Bilinski but actually feuding with him. Potiorek had deliberately ignored Bilinski in making arrangements for the Archduke's mission to Bosnia. Jovanovic met with Bilinski on June 21 at noon. He apparently decided to cut out the very heart of the message he supposedly had been told to deliver, that Belgrade had actual information of a plot to kill the Archduke. Instead, he spoke in general terms of the dangers inherent in the visit to Sarajevo and of the possibility that some disaffected Serb might attack Franz Ferdinand. Jovanovic had reason not to tell of the plot to kill Franz Ferdinand. He had been Apis's nominee for foreign minister in the May coup d'état that Hartwig had prevented. Now there were rumors that Apis was scheduling a new coup, perhaps for August, and once again proposed to promote Jovanovic. This was no time for Jovanovic to side with Pasic against Apis. In turn, Bilinski had reason to dismiss the vague warning he received. He had been ignored in security planning. Responsibility had been assumed by his subordinate, General Potiorek, on the express orders of Franz Ferdinand. If things went wrong on the trip to Bosnia, Potiorek, not Bilinski, would be blamed. Besides, It was difficult to worry much about what might happen to the Archduke. Bilinski had no cause to love him. In the Serbian capital, the Prime Minister tried to find out exactly what was going on, in order to stop it. Apis stonewalled, and Pasich loyalists in the army, the War Department, and the Interior Ministry were unable to shadow Princip's conspirators, who by now were in Bosnia, beyond Serbia's official reach. Leaders of Narodna Odbrana, the Serb Nationalist Society, held positions in Pasich's government, and therefore also learned of the assassination plot. They instructed their contact man in Bosnia to stop it from going forward. He failed. On June 2 the Central Executive Committee of the Black Hand convened. Or maybe it was just an informal meeting of all members who could be brought together on short notice. At the meeting, the members heard of the assistance that Major Tankovic had extended to the Princip group on behalf of their organization. For whatever reasons, they ordered the mission aborted immediately. Apparently the decision was unanimous, except, it seems, for Apis and Tankovic. Apis dispatched Tankovic's go-between with the Princip group to Bosnia, where he met with Danilo Ilic, who served as technical coordinator for the assassination team. Ilic relayed the order to Princip, call it off. Princip refused. As of June 20 or 21, Apis may have believed the assassination plan had been cancelled, while Pasic may still have felt otherwise. Ilic repeatedly tried to persuade Princip to obey orders to cancel the attack. But a clash of views in middle June between Apis and Pasic, whether about the death plot or something else, drove a Black Hand agent to send a new message to Princip revoking Apis's order to cancel and reinstating the operation. The man who brought the message later was accused by Serbia of being an Austrian spy, but the accusation was never proved. In fact, he served as Apis's chief spy master within Austria-Hungary. In any event, the conspiracy no longer may have been much of a secret. We are told that the cafes of the Balkans were abuzz with speculations about a plot to kill Franz Ferdinand, and that the cafes were alive with Austrian spies. A century later, we still do not know with certainty who knew what, and when they knew it.